The Horizon's Edge arrived at Mars Defense Station 3 days later, and everything happened fast. Admiral Gregory Kane was waiting at the docking bay with the security team and medical personnel. Danny Morris walked off his damaged ship and handed the Admiral a data chip containing everything they had recorded. Gregory looked at the footage of the Vorash fleet and his face became hard as stone. He ordered the station to go to alert status and called an emergency meeting of the War Council. General Patricia Ross arrived from the Colonial Marine headquarters on Europa. She was a tough woman who had fought in the colony rebellions 20 years ago. Dr. Nathan Price came from Earth, where he had been studying theoretical alien life. He had spent his whole career imagining what aliens might be like, but nothing had prepared him for the Vorash. They gathered in a secure room deep inside the station and watched the recordings that Danny had brought back. The footage showed the Vorash ships tearing apart asteroids and consuming the materials. It showed the biological nature of their vessels and the power of their weapons. Lisa Grant's tactical analysis appeared on the screens, and the numbers were frightening. The Vorash scouting fleet alone had more firepower than the entire human military. The main fleet would be unstoppable with current human weapons. Gregory asked Peter Hayes to explain what he had learned about the alien technology. Peter showed them how the Vorash ships were partly alive and partly machine. They grew their vessels using organic matter and powered them with some kind of biological fusion. The ships could repair themselves and adapt to threats. They were incredibly efficient and had been perfected over thousands of years. Human ships were metal boxes with engines compared to what the Vorash had built. Patricia wanted to know if humans could fight them. Lisa stood up and gave her assessment. She said a direct battle would be suicide with current forces. The Vorash had too many ships and their weapons were too powerful. However, she had noticed something during the encounter. The alien ships moved in perfect coordination, like they were all connected somehow. If that connection could be disrupted, then maybe the Vorash could be beaten. Nathan studied the biological data and confirmed Lisa's theory. The Vorash operated as a hive mind with all ships connected to a central consciousness. It was how they coordinated thousands of vessels across vast distances. He said if humans could find and destroy the central hive nexus, then the entire fleet would become disorganized. The problem was finding that nexus and getting close enough to destroy it. Gregory made a decision right there in the meeting. He would take the information to Earth Command and the President. They needed to mobilize every ship and every soldier that humanity had. Patricia said she would start training special forces for a possible boarding mission. Nathan would work with Peter to find a way to hurt the Vorash ships. Lisa would train fighter pilots in new tactics. Danny would be given a promotion and a new mission. On Earth, the news spread fast. President Helen York addressed the United Nations Emergency Assembly and told them about the Vorash threat. Some delegates did not believe her until they saw the footage. Others panicked and demanded immediate evacuation of the outer colonies. A few wanted to try negotiating with the aliens, even though the Vorash had already shown they were not interested in talking. Helen made a choice that would define her presidency. She told the assembly that humanity would fight. They would not run, and they would not surrender. Every nation would contribute ships and soldiers to a combined defense force. Every factory would start building weapons. Every scientist would work on finding a way to stop the Vorash. She gave them 3 months to prepare for the greatest battle humanity had ever faced. The military bases across human space became hives of activity. Ships that had been in storage for years were pulled out and refitted with weapons. Civilian vessels were converted into military transports. Factories that made farming equipment started making missiles instead. Soldiers who had retired were called back to service. Everyone knew what was coming and everyone worked to get ready. Peter Hayes led a team of engineers at the Mars Research Center. They studied the fragments of Vorash technology that Lisa had managed to scan during the brief encounter. The biological nature of the alien ships was fascinating, but also gave them an idea. Biological systems could be disrupted with electromagnetic pulses. Peter designed a new weapon that would send out massive EMP bursts specifically tuned to disrupt organic technology. The problem was that the EMP weapons needed to be close to work. Really close. That meant human soldiers would need to get right next to Vorash ships or ground forces. Patricia started training a special unit for exactly that kind of mission. She called them the Reapers, and she chose only volunteers who understood they might not come back. Lisa Grant was put in command of the Reapers, and she trained them harder than any unit had ever been trained before. Danny Morris was given command of the defense fleet. It was a collection of every military ship that humans had, plus converted civilian vessels. He had 60 warships of various sizes and another 100 support craft. Against the Vorash scouting fleet of 300 it was not enough. Against the main fleet it would be a joke. But it was all humanity had, so Danny studied every battle in history looking for tactics that might work. Nathan Price made a disturbing discovery while analyzing the Vorash communication intercepts. The aliens had been watching humanity for 50 years. They had known about humans for decades but had waited to attack. It seemed they liked to study their prey before harvesting. They knew about human weapons and human tactics. They knew about Earth and the colonies. The Vorash had been planning this invasion for a long time. 3 months passed faster than anyone wanted. The outer colonies were reinforced with what defenses could be built in time. Early warning satellites were placed at the edge of human space. The defense fleet gathered at a staging point near Saturn. Soldiers said goodbye to their families, not knowing if they would ever see them again. The Reapers did final training exercises. Everyone waited for the Vorash to arrive. The aliens came to a colony world called New Haven first. It was a terraformed planet with 4 million people who had built farms and cities over 2 generations. Governor Linda Scott received the warning that the Vorash were coming, but she refused to order a full evacuation. There was not enough time to save everyone, and she would not abandon anyone. Instead, she organized the colonists into a defense force using hunting rifles and mining explosives. The Vorash fleet dropped out of hyperspace above New Haven like a nightmare becoming real. 300 ships filled the sky and began their descent. The colonists watched as the alien vessels came down through the atmosphere. Some people ran, but most stayed to fight. Linda broadcast a message to the fleet telling the aliens that humans would not go quietly. The Vorash did not respond. They just kept coming. On Mars Defense Station, the alert sirens began to wail. Gregory Kane watched the reports coming in from New Haven, and he knew the war had started. He ordered Danny Morris to take the defense fleet and get to New Haven as fast as possible. Patricia Ross loaded the Reapers onto assault ships. Nathan Price sent his EMP weapons with them, hoping they would work. Lisa Grant checked her gear one last time, knowing that everything was about to change. The battle for humanity's survival had begun, and no one knew how it would end. The Vorash landed on New Haven like a plague descending from the stars. Their ships touched down in fields and forests, and the harvester drones emerged immediately. The drones were massive machines that stood 30 meters tall with multiple arms designed to tear apart anything in their path. They began ripping up trees and soil and buildings, feeding everything into their processing chambers. The organic matter would be consumed and the minerals extracted. This was how the Vorash harvested a world, and they had done it 17 times before. Governor Linda Scott watched from the capital city as the first drones approached. She had organized the 4 million colonists into resistance cells scattered across the planet. They had hunting rifles that farmers used to protect livestock from predators. They had explosives that miners used to break apart rock formations. They had vehicles and determination, and the knowledge that no help was coming for at least 2 days. Linda activated the resistance network and gave the order to fight. The first attacks came from unexpected directions. A group of farmers drove their heavy tractors into a harvester drone's legs while it was focused on consuming a forest. The impact did not destroy the machine, but it stumbled and fell sideways. Other colonists rushed forward with mining explosives and placed charges on the exposed joints. The detonation tore the drone apart and the Vorash machine stopped moving. It was the first victory, and it proved the aliens could be hurt. The resistance learned fast. The harvester drones were powerful but slow to turn. They were designed to process materials, not fight a guerrilla war. Colonists used the terrain to their advantage, attacking from buildings and hills, then disappearing before the drones could respond. They collapsed bridges when drones tried to cross rivers. They set fires in canyons and funneled the machines into kill zones where dozens of fighters waited with explosives. But the Vorash learned too. After losing 12 drones, they adapted their tactics. Smaller warrior forms began accompanying the harvesters. These warriors were fast and deadly with razor-sharp limbs and biological weapons that shot acid. The resistance started taking heavy casualties. Linda moved from cell to cell coordinating the defense, but every hour more colonists died. The Vorash were grinding them down through sheer numbers. In space above New Haven, the Vorash fleet detected ships approaching at high speed. It was Danny Morris leading the human defense fleet of 60 warships and 100 support vessels. Danny knew the odds were terrible. 300 Vorash ships against his fleet meant he was outnumbered 5-1. But New Haven had become a symbol. If humanity abandoned its colonies without fighting, then morale would collapse everywhere. He ordered the fleet to attack formation and prayed they would last long enough to evacuate some of the civilians. Lisa Grant was aboard the assault carrier preparing the Reapers for deployment. Their mission was to get to the surface and help the resistance while testing Peter's new EMP weapons. She addressed her team of 50 special operators and told them the truth. Many of them would not survive this mission, but they could save thousands of lives and learn how to fight the Vorash. Every soldier volunteered to go knowing the risks. The space battle started when Danny's fleet came into range. Human missiles streaked across the void targeting the Vorash bioships. The aliens responded with their energy weapons that cut through shields and armor like they were paper. The first human ship to die was a destroyer called the Vigilant. It took 3 hits and exploded in a ball of fire. Danny watched 30 crew members disappear in an instant, and he felt rage building inside him. He ordered a tactic that no military academy had ever taught. Lieutenant Jake Murphy was flying a fighter craft called a Valkyrie, and he led a squadron of 20 pilots in a desperate move. They accelerated toward a Vorash biocruiser and overloaded their reactor cores. The fighters became bombs streaking toward the enemy. Jake whispered a prayer and thought of his family on Earth. Then the fighters hit the alien ship and detonated. The explosion tore a massive hole in the Vorash vessel, and it began venting atmosphere and biological fluids into space. Other pilots saw what Jake had done, and more squadrons volunteered for suicide runs. Danny wanted to refuse, but he knew they needed every advantage. 15 more fighters made the same sacrifice and destroyed 3 Vorash ships. It was working, but the cost was unbearable. Danny was sending young pilots to die, and each death felt like a knife in his heart. On the surface, Lisa and the Reapers landed in drop pods near the capital city. They moved fast toward where the Resistance was making a stand against 2 Harvester drones and dozens of warrior forms. Lisa saw colonists fighting with whatever weapons they had and dying by the dozens. She ordered her team to deploy the EMP devices, and they placed the charges on the legs of the nearest Harvester, Peter. Hayes had designed the EMP weapons to disrupt biological systems, and when they detonated, the effect was immediate. The Harvester drone's leg spasmed and it crashed to the ground. The warrior forms nearby began convulsing and their organic weapons stopped functioning. The Resistance fighters surged forward and finished off the disabled Vorash with conventional weapons. It worked. The EMP devices actually worked against the alien technology, but the devices had a problem. They only worked at very close range. To use them, soldiers needed to get within a few meters of the Vorash machines. That meant running through enemy fire and facing the warrior forms in close combat. Corporal Betty White volunteered to place charges on a Harvester that was destroying a refugee convoy. She ran through a hail of acid fire and reached the drone's legs. She set the charges and activated them, but took a direct hit before she could get clear. Betty died saving 300 civilians, and Lisa made sure everyone knew her name. The battle for New Haven lasted 6 days, and it was brutal. In space, Danny's fleet fought a running battle against the Vorash ships. He lost 20 warships and thousands of crew, but his forces managed to destroy 80 Vorash vessels. The aliens had never faced resistance like this before. They had never encountered a species that fought with such desperate creativity. The Vorash began to pull back their forces to reassess the situation. On the ground, the Resistance and the Reapers had destroyed 40 Harvester drones and hundreds of warrior forms. They had learned the EMP weapons worked, and they had learned how the Vorash fought. But the cost was staggering. Over 1 million colonists were dead. Entire cities had been consumed. The planet's surface was scarred with massive craters, where the Harvesters had stripped away everything. Linda Scott ordered the evacuation of the remaining colonists. Transport ships landed under covering fire from the fleet and began loading refugees. It took 18 hours to get 3 million people off the planet. Lisa and the Reapers fought a rearguard action protecting the landing zones. Danny's fleet held the orbital space, keeping the Vorash ships away from the transports. When the last transport lifted off, Linda Scott was on board. She watched through the viewport as New Haven burned below her. The world her grandparents had terraformed was being destroyed. But 3 million people had survived because the Resistance had bought time. Because soldiers like Betty White had sacrificed everything. Because humanity had proven it could fight back. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying the refugees to safety. New Haven was lost, but the battle had taught humanity crucial lessons. The Vorash could be hurt. Their technology had weaknesses, and humans would fight with every weapon and tactic they possessed. The war was just beginning, but humanity had drawn first blood. The victory at New Haven changed everything, even though it had cost so much. 3 million refugees spread across the remaining colonies and told stories of the battle. They spoke of Governor Linda Scott, who had organized the resistance. They remembered Corporal Betty White, who died saving civilians. They talked about how the Vorash could be beaten if humans were willing to pay the price. The story spread like fire through human space, and something shifted in the collective consciousness. Fear turned into anger, and anger turned into determination. Admiral Gregory Kane studied the battle reports and saw patterns in the chaos. The Vorash were powerful, but they were not invincible. Their ships moved in coordinated formations that suggested a central command structure. Their ground forces adapted quickly, but only after communicating with the larger fleet. Everything pointed to Lisa Grant's original theory. The aliens operated as a hive mind, and if that mind could be disrupted, then the entire Vorash force would fall apart. Commander Lisa Grant returned to Mars with the surviving Reapers. She had taken 50 operators to New Haven, and only 34 came back. Each loss weighed on her, but she could not stop to grieve. Patricia Ross promoted her to full commander and gave her authority to expand the Reapers into a full regiment. Lisa began training hundreds of new special operators for a mission that seemed impossible. They would need to board a Vorash command ship and destroy the Hive Nexus from the inside. Peter Hayes worked day and night analyzing the wreckage of destroyed Vorash vessels. His team at the Mars Research Center pulled apart alien technology piece by piece, learning its secrets. The biological nature of the ships was based on a form of organic computing that used neural tissue to process information. Peter realized this meant the entire Vorash fleet was essentially one massive distributed brain. Each ship was a neuron, and the command vessel was the central cortex. If they could kill that cortex, the whole system would collapse. The problem was finding the command vessel. The Vorash main fleet had not arrived yet, and intelligence suggested they were staging somewhere beyond human detection range. Nathan Price worked with a team of scientists to develop new long-range sensors that could detect biological signatures in deep space. It took weeks of testing, but eventually they created a network of sensor buoys that could identify Vorash ships at extreme distances. Danny Morris was promoted to Commodore and given command of all human military forces. It was a responsibility that terrified him, but he accepted it because there was no one else. He spent his time coordinating the defense of 20 colony worlds while preparing for the arrival of the main Vorash fleet. Every ship that could be armed was brought into service. Every soldier received training in anti-Vorash tactics. Every colony built bunkers and resistance networks like the one Linda had created on New Haven. President Helen York faced increasing pressure from civilian leaders who wanted to negotiate or evacuate. Some colonies declared independence rather than contribute forces to the defense fleet. Others hoarded resources instead of sharing them. Helen dealt with each crisis firmly and without compromise. She gave one speech that became famous across human space. She stood before the cameras and said that humanity would not beg for mercy from creatures that wanted to consume them. They would fight and they would win, or they would die trying. After that speech, the resistance movements on the colonies stopped. Everyone committed to the defense. The sensor network detected the Vorash main fleet 3 weeks after New Haven. It was even larger than feared. Over 2,000 ships were moving through space in a formation that stretched across millions of kilometers. They were heading toward the core worlds and would arrive in 40 days. The sheer size of the fleet caused panic on some worlds, but Helen and Gregory held firm. They had a plan, and it depended on perfect timing and incredible luck. Lisa trained her expanded Reaper force in zero-gravity combat and shipboard tactics. They practiced breaching alien hulls and fighting in hostile environments. They learned how to use the EMP weapons and conventional explosives together. Sergeant Kevin Taylor became her second-in-command, and he trained the demolitions teams. Dr. Claire Bennett joined the unit as a specialist in Vorash biology. She would guide them to the Hive Nexus once they were inside the command vessel. Peter and his engineers built stealth pods based on captured Vorash technology. The pods had organic hulls that would read as friendly to alien sensors. They could carry a small team right up to a Vorash ship without being detected. The technology was untested and dangerous, but it was the only way to get the Reapers close enough to board the command vessel. Peter tested the pods himself and barely survived when one nearly broke apart during flight trials. Danny planned the largest military operation in human history. It was called Operation Silent Knife, and it had two parts. The human fleet would engage the Vorash armada at Titan near Saturn, while the Reapers infiltrated the command vessel. The fleet battle would be a diversion to keep the aliens focused away from the boarding team. Danny knew his forces would be massacred, but if Lisa succeeded, then it would not matter. The entire Vorash fleet would collapse and humanity would survive. The 40 days passed too quickly. Families said final goodbyes, knowing many would never see each other again. Soldiers wrote letters to be delivered if they died. Engineers made last-minute repairs to ships. Scientists ran final tests on weapons. Everyone prepared for the battle that would decide humanity's fate. On Earth, people gathered in streets and watched the news. On the colonies, they huddled in bunkers. Everyone knew the Vorash were coming, and everyone waited. The alien fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system and began advancing toward Saturn. Danny's defense force waited near Titan with every ship humanity possessed. He had 200 warships now and 300 support vessels. Against 2,000 Vorash bioships, it looked pathetic, but it was all they had. He gave orders for the fleet to form the hammer formation he had designed. It would funnel the Vorash into kill zones where concentrated fire could destroy them. It was a desperate tactic, but desperation was all humans had left. Lisa and the Reapers loaded into the stealth pods. There were 12 pods carrying 10 soldiers each. 120 operators were going to attempt the most dangerous mission ever conceived. They would approach the Vorash command vessel, which was a ship the size of Earth's moon. They would breach the hull and fight through thousands of warrior forms. They would find the hive nexus deep in the ship's core and destroy it. Then they would try to escape before the entire vessel died around them. Kevin checked the demolition charges one more time. He had enough explosives to level a city, and he hoped it would be enough. Claire studied the biological maps of Vorash ships, trying to predict where the nexus would be located. The other Reapers prepared their weapons and armor in silence. Everyone knew the odds. Everyone had volunteered anyway. The pods launched from the assault carrier and began their approach. The Vorash sensors scanned them but read them as friendly vessels due to the organic hulls. The pods slipped past the outer picket ships and headed toward the massive command vessel at the center of the formation. Lisa watched the alien ship grow larger in the viewport. It pulsed with bioluminescent patterns and seemed almost alive. In 45 minutes, they would either save humanity or die trying. Danny gave the order and the human fleet attacked. Missiles and energy weapons lit up space as the two forces collided. The Battle of Titan had begun and the fate of Earth hung in the balance. The stealth pods crashed through the outer hull of the Vorash command vessel, and everything went wrong immediately. The organic sensors detected the breach and warrior forms swarmed toward the landing site. Lisa and the Reapers emerged from their pods firing weapons and throwing grenades. The interior of the ship was a nightmare of pulsing biological walls and creatures that seemed part machine and part insect. Private Andy Cole took point with a heavy weapon cutting down the first wave of warriors, but more kept coming. The 12 pods had landed in a massive hangar bay filled with dormant biofighters. Kevin immediately saw an opportunity and planted charges on the fighter craft. The explosions would cover their advance and create chaos. Claire studied her scanner, trying to find the path to the hive nexus. The readings showed it was deep in the ship's core, at least 3 kilometers from their position. They would have to fight through the entire vessel to reach it. Lisa divided the Reapers into 3 teams. She would lead one team with Kevin and Claire toward the nexus. The other 2 teams would create diversions, pulling Vorash forces away from the main route. It was a suicide mission for the diversion teams, but everyone had known the risks. Sergeant Ryan Palmer took command of one diversion team and Lieutenant Kate Morris took the other. They synchronized their timers and moved out in different directions. In space above Titan, the battle was savage beyond anything humans had experienced. Danny's fleet had formed the hammer formation, with smaller ships creating corridors that funneled Vorash vessels into kill zones. The heavy dreadnoughts waited in those zones with all weapons firing. Captain Ryan Bell commanded the dreadnought Valiant, and he led the capital ships in a devastating broadside assault. The Vorash biocruisers were tough, but concentrated fire from multiple dreadnoughts could break through their hulls. But the aliens had numbers on their side. For every Vorash ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. Human vessels were dying fast. The cruiser Defiant took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded, killing 400 crew. The destroyer Thunder broke apart under sustained fire. Fighter squadrons were being wiped out as they tried to protect the larger ships. Danny watched the casualty reports climb and felt each death like a physical blow. He needed Lisa to succeed soon or there would be no fleet left to save. Inside the command vessel, Lisa's team was fighting through corridors that seemed to breathe. The walls pulsed with bioelectric energy and the air smelled of acid and decay. Warrior forms attacked from every direction, using the organic structure to their advantage. Andy Cole was protecting Claire while she navigated, but he took a direct hit from an acid weapon. His armor held but barely. He kept fighting even as the acid ate through the outer layer. Kevin's demolition charges were working perfectly. Every 100 meters they planted explosives that detonated after they passed cutting off pursuit. The Vorash warriors kept coming, but the explosions slowed them down. Claire's scanner showed they were getting closer to the Nexus. The biological signals were getting stronger, and the organic walls were becoming more complex. They were heading into the heart of the ship where the hive mind controlled everything. The diversion teams were drawing massive Vorash forces away from Lisa's route. Ryan Palmer's team had made it to the ship's power generation chambers and were destroying critical systems. The entire vessel shuddered as explosions rippled through it. Kate Morris led her team in an assault on what appeared to be a warrior breeding chamber. They killed hundreds of Vorash but were being overwhelmed. Kate sent a final message saying they had completed their mission. Then her signal went dead. Danny received a communication from Admiral Gregory Kane on Mars. The Vorash were breaking through the defensive line and heading toward the inner planets. Enemy ships were already past Jupiter and accelerating toward Earth. Kane said they had maybe 6 hours before the aliens reached the homeworld. Danny made a decision that would haunt him forever. He ordered the remaining fleet to fall back and form a last stand at Earth. They would abandon the outer colonies and defend humanity's birthplace with everything they had left. Lisa's team finally reached the chamber containing the hive nexus. It was a massive room filled with neural tissue and bioelectric conduits. The nexus itself was a pulsing mass of organic material the size of a building. Thousands of tendrils connected it to the rest of the ship, and through those connections it controlled the entire Vorash fleet. Claire confirmed this was the target, and Kevin began placing his charges. They needed to use everything they had to make sure the nexus was completely destroyed. But the Vorash were not stupid. Hundreds of warrior forms poured into the chamber protecting the nexus. The remaining Reapers formed a defensive perimeter and held the line. Andy Cole's armor finally failed and acid burned through to his skin. He kept fighting anyway, knowing that if they failed here, then humanity was finished. He killed dozens of warriors before one got past his guard and struck a fatal blow. He fell looking at Claire, and his last words were simple. "Make it count." Kevin finished placing the charges while the Reapers fought desperately. He had a 30-second timer, and Lisa ordered everyone to retreat. They ran for the exit, fighting their way through warrior forms. Kevin turned to follow, but saw Lisa had stayed behind. She was firing at the warriors, buying time for the team to escape. Kevin grabbed her and physically dragged his commander toward the pods. He yelled that she did not get to be the hero alone. The charges detonated in a massive explosion of bioenergy. The nexus erupted in a cascade of neural feedback that traveled through every connection. The hive mind screamed in a way that was felt rather than heard. Across the entire Vorash fleet, ships suddenly lost coordination. Biocruisers collided with each other. Formations broke apart. Warriors stopped moving as if they were confused. The central consciousness had been destroyed, and 2,000 alien vessels were suddenly operating on instinct alone. Danny saw the change immediately. The Vorash ships that had been working together perfectly were now acting independently. Some tried to retreat while others kept attacking. The coordination was gone, and human forces could finally exploit it. He ordered the fleet to press the advantage and target the largest enemy vessels. The dreadnoughts focused their fire on Vorash command ships, tearing them apart. Fighters swarmed smaller vessels and destroyed them before they could recover. On Earth, President Helen York watched the battle from the command center. She had prepared one final order. If the fleet failed, she would launch every nuclear weapon Earth possessed, not at the Vorash, but at Earth itself. Humanity would destroy their homeworld rather than let it be harvested. She held the authorization codes ready, but as she watched the Vorash fleet fall apart, she realized she would not need them. The impossible had happened. Humanity was winning. Lisa and the surviving Reapers escaped the dying command vessel in a stolen Vorash fighter. Of the 120 soldiers who had started the mission, only 12 were left. Kevin flew the craft while Lisa coordinated with the fleet. They were pursued by confused Vorash vessels but made it to human lines. Danny himself guided them in, and when the fighter landed, he was there to meet them. He helped Lisa out of the craft, and she collapsed from exhaustion and wounds. They had done it. The mission had succeeded. The Battle of Titan continued for 3 more hours as human forces destroyed the disorganized Vorash fleet. Ship after ship fell to coordinated human attacks. Some aliens tried to retreat, but Danny had ships positioned to cut off their escape. By the time the battle ended, over 1,500 Vorash vessels had been destroyed. The survivors fled back through a spatial rift, leaving wreckage scattered across the solar system. Humanity had won, but the cost was staggering. 12 colony worlds had been lost, including New Haven. The defense fleet was reduced to fewer than 100 operational ships. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians were dead. Earth itself had come within hours of being destroyed. But humans had survived and proven they could defeat an enemy that had harvested 17 other civilizations. In the weeks after the battle, humanity began to rebuild. Danny Morris was promoted to admiral and given the task of creating a new fleet specifically designed to fight threats like the Vorash. Lisa Grant retired from active duty to train the next generation of Reapers with Kevin as her second-in-command. Peter Hayes led the effort to reverse engineer Vorash technology, giving humanity advances in biotech and energy systems that would change civilization. Governor Linda Scott worked with the refugees to establish new colonies to replace the lost worlds. The survivors of New Haven became symbols of resistance, and their stories inspired a generation. President Helen York remained in office and guided humanity's transformation from explorers into warriors. The age of peaceful discovery was over, and a new era had begun. 10 years after the battle, Danny stood on the bridge of a new ship called the Endurance. It was the largest vessel humanity had ever built, combining human engineering with captured Vorash biotechnology. He looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in the depths of space other enemies waited, but humanity was ready now. They had learned the most important lesson. When faced with extinction, humans did not surrender. They fought back with everything they possessed. Danny Morris had been staring at the same screen for 3 hours when everything changed. He was the captain of a ship called the Horizon's Edge, and his job was to explore places where humans had never gone before. The ship was not new, and it made strange noises sometimes, but it worked well enough for what they needed to do. His crew was small, but they were good at their jobs, and Danny trusted them with his life. Lisa Grant sat at the tactical station checking the weapon systems, even though they had not fired a shot in 2 years. She was a lieutenant commander and had more combat experience than anyone else on the ship. Peter Hayes was down in the engineering section making sure the old engines kept running. He could fix almost anything with spare parts and determination. Amy Wells handled communications, and she was the one who first noticed something was wrong. The ship was near a star system called Kepler 442, and they were mapping asteroids when the sensors started screaming. Amy looked at her screen and her face went pale. She called out to Danny and said something was coming through from somewhere else. The space in front of them started to tear open like fabric being ripped apart. Danny had never seen anything like it in his 15 years of space travel. Something massive came through the tear in space. It was a ship, but it did not look like any human ship. The hull seemed to be alive, and it pulsed with lights that moved in patterns across its surface. Then another ship came through, and another, until there were hundreds of them filling the space around the asteroid belt. Danny ordered Amy to send a greeting message in all the languages humans knew. They waited, but there was no response. Then the alien ships started to move toward the asteroids, and they began to break them apart. Large arms reached out from the ships and pulled the rocks inside. It looked like they were eating the asteroids and consuming everything they could find. Peter came running up from engineering and stood next to Danny, watching the screens. He said the ships were using some kind of biological technology that he had never seen before. The aliens were not just mining the asteroids, but actually absorbing the materials into their ships. Lisa started scanning the alien vessels, and what she found made everyone go quiet. The ships had weapons. They were powerful weapons that could destroy a planet if they wanted to. Lisa counted the vessels, and there were over 300 of them just in this system. She told Danny that if these aliens were hostile, Then the horizon's edge would not last more than a few seconds in a fight. Danny tried again to make contact. He sent messages in mathematics and music and even simple pictures. The aliens ignored every attempt. Then one of the alien ships turned toward the horizon's edge and something lit up on its surface. Lisa shouted a warning, but it was too late. A beam of energy shot across space and hit the shields. The ship shook hard and alarms started going off everywhere. Peter yelled that the shields were down to 30% from just one shot. Danny made a fast decision and ordered the ship to jump to hyperspace. Amy worked her controls and started the jump sequence, but it would take 30 seconds. Another alien ship turned toward them, and Lisa said they were targeting the engines. If they lost the engines, then they would be trapped here with these creatures. The second shot came and hit the back of the ship. The whole vessel shook and sparks flew from control panels. Peter screamed into the comm that they were losing power. Amy counted down the seconds until the jump. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. Lisa watched as 3 more alien ships turned their weapons toward the horizon's edge. Danny gripped his chair and waited. 10 seconds. The aliens fired again, and this time the shot hit the port side. A section of the hull breached and emergency doors slammed shut. Amy kept counting. 5 seconds. The ship's systems were failing and red lights covered every panel. Then space twisted around them and they jumped. The stars stretched into lines and the horizon's edge escaped into hyperspace. Danny let out a breath he did not know he was holding. They had survived, but barely. He ordered everyone to report their status. Peter said the engines were damaged but still working. Lisa confirmed they had lost 2 crew members in the hull breach. Amy was already plotting a course back to human space. But before they jumped away, Lisa had managed to intercept some of the alien communications. The computer tried to translate the signals, and most of it was just noise. However, one word came through clearly in a way that made everyone's blood run cold. The word was harvester. Peter worked with the computer to learn more from the intercepted signals. What he found was worse than any nightmare. The aliens called themselves the Vorash, and they had been traveling through space for thousands of years. They found civilizations and consumed them. They took everything, the metals, the minerals, the organic matter, even the people. They were like locusts moving from one star system to another, leaving nothing behind. The computer found fragments of data that showed the Vorash had destroyed 17 different alien species. Some of those civilizations had been more advanced than humans. It did not matter to the Vorash. They consumed everything and moved on. The data also showed something terrifying. The Vorash fleet that Danny had just seen was only a scouting group. The main fleet was much larger with thousands of ships. Lisa studied the projected course of the Vorash fleet. She ran the numbers 3 times, hoping she was wrong, but the answer was always the same. The aliens were heading toward human space. They would reach the outer colonies in about 3 months. After that, they would move toward Earth and the core worlds. If humans did not stop them, then humanity would become the 18th species that the Vorash harvested into extinction. Danny ordered the ship to go to maximum speed. They needed to get back and warn everyone. The horizon's edge was badly damaged and limping through hyperspace, but it kept going. Every person on the ship knew what was at stake. They had discovered intelligent alien life, but those aliens wanted to destroy everything humans had built. Amy sent emergency messages ahead using the long-range transmitter. She told Mars Command and Earth Command that first contact had been made. She told them it was hostile. She told them to prepare for war. Peter kept the engines running even though they were ready to fail. Lisa prepared a full tactical report on everything they had seen. The Vorash were coming and humanity had 3 months to get ready. Danny looked at the stars streaking past and wondered if it would be enough time. Humans had never fought a war like this before. They had never faced an enemy that wanted to consume their entire species. He thought about Earth and the billions of people who had no idea what was coming for them. He thought about the colonies scattered across dozens of star systems. All of them were in danger now. The horizon's edge raced through hyperspace carrying the most important message in human history. First contact had been made and it meant war. The battle for survival was about to begin and no one knew if humanity could win.